Okay, so we often get asked like how we manage things in the community, and it's really quite simple. Once I click the thing.
I think you have to actually click that.
Clicking the thing. Behind the curtain, it's just YAML. Bob is so proud of this slide, you have no idea. He spent so much time on it. So first, why do I have any clout to talk about the Kubernetes community? Aside from stuff that's on that slide and is fairly generic in how to get a hold of me, I'm the lead for the now delayed/postponed Contributor Summit in Amsterdam. I'm also a Slack admin and do quite a bit in Sig Contribx.
Speaking of Sig Contribx, besides all the stuff on that, I am the current chair of Sig Contribx, and events and everything like that is a sub-project under essentially a part of my responsibility now. So before we actually dive into this, I just want to give a little bit of a TLDR on Kubernetes if you're not actually familiar with it. Kubernetes itself is actually Greek for helmsman or pilot of a ship. It was built originally in Google sort of from the lessons learned from developing and running Borg and Omega, sort of the system that they use for orchestrating GCP and all of Google's own workloads. Now, they open sourced it back in 2014, but they realized that they probably would not get as much adoption if it was just still owned by Google. So they worked with the Linux Foundation in 2015 to basically spin it out into this vendor-neutral entity, and that sort of gave birth to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And now you sort of see, like, I forget how many are under the CNCF, but it's at least 40 if you include Sandbox. Yeah, and so Kubernetes itself now sort of serves as a platform for all those projects. And let me have a little bit of knowledge about the Kubernetes itself. Let me talk about just a brief sec about the community. So the community behind Kubernetes is massive. It is currently the #1 open source project by developer activity, with the caveat being that is measured by GitHub events. And as the #2 project by pull requests, we have collectively over, since February, 42,000 plus contributors. We have roughly 1,200 org members, and our Slack is the largest public Slack at 92,000 plus people connected to it. We really, for such a large community, it is surprisingly close-knit. We really like to say that it is truly like about the people in our community, and this is reflected very much in our community values. So a lot of the things we're actually going to talk about today touch on these 5 values, and you'll see them reflected in what we do and sort of how we've implemented some of our tooling. So I'll just go over these briefly. Distribution is better than centralization. The project should not be gated by a few specific people. We will try and delegate responsibility where we can and as much as possible. The code base itself is too big for any single person to know. Community over product or company. This is sort of simple. We will try and prioritize what is best for Kubernetes, not, Red Hat or Google or Amazon or any of those groups. And does that mean that a feature might slip or a deadline not met? Yes, we will do what's best for the project. Automation over process. We will automate as much as possible where it makes sense, because nobody likes toil. We don't want to bog people down with process. That's not to say we don't have that. There's still a good amount in there, but we still try and automate what we can. Inclusive is better than exclusive. We will do our best to be as welcoming as possible. Successful projects require different perspectives, and we can only get those by offering like a welcoming and safe place for people to express their thoughts. Lastly, evolution is better than stagnation. We will strive for continual improvement. This isn't just for code, but for people, processes, and culture. Things like mentorship and elevating others are core to the Kubernetes philosophy. And with that in mind, we're going to sort of walk through the process of contributing. And through that, you'll see some of the automation and things we've built to help sort of streamline the contributing experience.
You can tell that we're friends, right? So let's start with someone's first contribution. Repos have different requirements, but for this conversation, we're just going to talk about the big one, which is Kubernetes, or KK. So say you submit something small, like you fix a Golang error, or there's a typo in some docs under KK that you want to fix. Before your first submission, you can even see some of the automation that is built around GitHub. Even before the PR is submitted, you can see pieces with the PR template, and the PR template will help you classify and direct the PR. It is a little blurry to see, which is unfortunate. But if you can see on the left, it actually has essentially a GitHub template that lets you predefine certain labels depending on how your PR may be classified. Things like asking if it's a bug or a feature, or if you know the relevant SIG that needs to be assigned. SIG is special interest group. We will be talking about those. And the first experience that a person has with our automation really is then our bots. If it's their first PR, the Kate CI robot will give them a nice little welcome message and provide links and resources along with explaining how to get your PR reviewed faster. Because oftentimes with large projects, trying to get a PR review can be a painful process. Before we continue, we actually need to talk about the Kubernetes CI system, because a lot of stuff revolves and relies on the CI system, which is PROW. PROW is a CI system built by Kubernetes and really for Kubernetes. Just to say it, because Kubernetes, it runs on Kubernetes as well. It supports 3 primary jobs. The first is a periodic job, and that is simply, think a cron job. You specify a cron or a repeating time, and it will always run the job that you define. There are pre-submits and post-submits, which just line up with Git. They're either pre-commit or post-commit. Everything within PROW is defined within a single repo, which is the k-test infra repo. So when we talk about things like KK or K-community or K-test infra, we're just not saying Kubernetes / just to get that out of the way. But all of the project's CI jobs, including things that run for KK, are defined within the test infra repo. And PROW handles everything from managing merges to all of the CI or all the automation that we're talking about now and for the rest of this presentation. This is just a quick example of YAML, because if we talk about Kubernetes, we have to talk about YAML. Hopefully that is one takeaway by the end of this presentation. But this is just a simple example of a pre-submit. In the korg repo, it's going to run a specific container that runs a hack script. A couple interesting things. PROW is meant to be very, very simple, but very, very powerful. So if we did not have that decorate flag in there set to true, the PROW job wouldn't even know to clone the repo that it's discussing, or that it's relevant to. It just wouldn't automatically git pull. So that's just an example of how interesting and like edge casey we have to be when it comes to Kubernetes CI. Within GitHub, whenever you do a PR or submit a PR, you can actually view the pass-fail status of the PROW jobs that are running against your PR. And that's what you see up top. With GitHub, you have these ideas of checks that you need before you can actually get it to merge. And we will actually automatically merge PRs depending on the status of these checks. But the really cool thing is you can click details for any of these jobs and then automatically go to the PROW dashboard. It's called Spyglass. So it'll go to the dashboard of your job and then show you results. There's a lot there, so I didn't take a whole lot of screenshots, but you can see the build log, you can see the pod info for the pod that ran your job, things like that. Before a PR can be merged, like I said, there's a lot of checks and conditions that need to be met. A lot of these are reflected by the labels that are applied to a PR. The first one that usually, if you're a new contributor coming to Kubernetes, that gets flagged is CNCF CLA equals no. We follow the CNCF as a project home, and therefore we have to follow the CNCF CLA. With a lot of different open source projects, they may have you sign a CLA. We absolutely refuse any PR that doesn't have a CLA signed to it. Once you sign the CLA, usually you have to ping in the PR thread, hey, sign the CLA, and then someone that has essentially org membership can go in and run a command, /check-CLA. The CLA bot automatically goes, make sure, and then your label gets cleared and your CNCF CLA equals yes. Getting reviewers for PRs can be slightly problematic, except in Kubernetes, because we have this concept of an owner's file. Owner's files let you define a reviewer and an approver. Essentially, a reviewer is someone that's going to get assigned to look at the PR, and the approver may also get assigned, but is the only type of person that can /approve, essentially say this PR is acceptable for this repo and has final say over it. There's this other concept that I think we talk about later, which is LGTM, which just means someone else has looked at it. So it's always this kind of two-phase approach. Some advanced options with owners files is they do not inherit from the parent. We want to be extraordinarily explicit with our code base. But there are regex filters for selectively applying labels and that don't assign reviewers. So let's talk about this concept of blunderbuss. Blunderbuss is the sub-project in Kubernetes under test infra that will automatically assign reviewers and that sort of thing. It will first determine potential reviewers by going over all of the folders. So for example, say you're 3 folders deep in Kubernetes, but there's not an owner's file, it will then go up and then look for an owner's file. And if there's not one there, it will go up. It is attempting to find an owner to assign, or reviewer. It will then assign each file being changed with a weight, depending on the number of lines of code that was changed, and that adds a label, whether it's like a size, small, medium, large, XL, et cetera. And then it assigns each reviewer a weight. If you happen to be in more than one owner's file being touched, you'll have a greater chance of being assigned as a reviewer. So there's a little bit of intelligence there. And like I said earlier, it tries to assign a minimum number of reviewers, which is 2. Blunderbuss is also trying to be smart and nice to our contributors. So if you have a GitHub status, this is one of those new features. If your GitHub status is set to away, it will not assign you because, hey, you should not have PRs assigned if you're on vacation, which I don't think I did before this talk. Oops. So that's all good, but there are some limitations to blunderbuss and how this works. Like I said, you cannot assign people by regex, it's just labels. And like I said, we try to be extraordinarily explicit. So there are a lot of owners files. There are 475 owners files in Kubernetes alone. There are thousands across the project. So just trying to find how many folders and pieces of code you may be responsible for can be not a trivial task. And because there are so many people that may be in these owners files, there are a lot that may actually be stale as reviewers. If someone hasn't had a GitHub interaction in 18 months, do we have the confidence to say that they can actually review and approve code? Kubernetes is a fast-moving project, and this is something that we're trying to deal with. So there's some future work that's happening here. One of them is we're trying to allow GitHub groups instead of, there's another folder called owner aliases where we can assign or create a group and then have people under that group. We're trying to work better with GitHub groups. And that will at least help us keep everything in sync because we have to define those groups in different places and things can get redundant and out of sync. And then there's also additional work that's being talked about trying to prune those owners and making sure that people are relevant.
So the assigning of reviewers and the applying those first set of labels, all those occur actually before any tests are run. So once your PR has sort of gone through the first pass, a reviewer might have taken a look at it, you've signed the CLA, the reviewer thinks that they're confident enough that it is sort of good enough to test. A reviewer or other member in the Kubernetes community may sign off on it with a command that we call OK to test. And this will flip the label needs OK to test to just OK to test. And what this does is that this signals that we have a high confidence that the code in this PR is good. It might still need further review, it might need changes, but it's good enough to test. And there's a reason for this. Within the KK repo, testing in Kubernetes is expensive. A full run of the tests take roughly 1.5 to 2 hours to complete the full test suite. So other repos don't take nearly as long. This is, again, just focusing on KK. And beyond that 1.5 to 2 hours, this isn't necessarily the end of it. Some of the tests could be flaky, and they'll have to be rerun. Now, our CI is at least a bit smarter about this. So if tests have failed, if you go to rerun the tests, unless you essentially manually override it, it will only retest the tests that have failed. And with how complex this can be, you can sort of imagine how much is involved in orchestrating all this. So, let's say this is your PR. Your tests have passed. Things are looking good. We're now approaching a point where it could potentially be merged. And this brings up LGTM. LGTM, looks good to me. Each PR requires 2 separate checks, and Jeff sort of alluded to this earlier, before it can be merged. Those checks come in the form of 2 additional labels, LGTM and approve. And we'll start with LGTM. Any org member in Kubernetes can actually apply the LGTM label, but it's commonly applied by the reviewers that are assigned to it. Again, they've done that first pass. They might have made some suggestions. You might have responded to those suggestions, made changes. And at this point, they'll sign off with an LGTM. And sort of that sign-off signals that the PR could be ready for final review or being assigned to an approver. At this point, you actually, the bot will respond and tell you who you should assign to review for, at that point. The next thing is, unlike LGTM, approves must come from a listed approver or an approver higher up the chain. Approves are sort of the final gate before something can be merged. Approvers are generally former reviewers that have been that have updated the code or spent a while reviewing that section of code base. And if your PR actually touches multiple parts of the code base, it will require sign-off from multiple approvers or a higher level approver up the entire chain. This is just because, if you're touching multiple areas, someone might be an expert in one area but not another. And we have this sort of 2-stage approach as sort of a safeguard. We just don't want something accidentally being merged that could cause a problem. And that isn't to say it hasn't happened, but it does help limit the chance of it happening. So once the approvers have signed off, the PR is LGTM, all tests have passed, our CI will sort of go into work and move to merge it. So awesome. Your PR is merged, but now what? Well, do I have a pitch for you? The Kubernetes project is big, and we know that. Ownership of different areas of the project is broken down and managed actually into sort of different community groups.
Hi, Josh.
Yep. As a member of SigBeard. So within the Kubernetes project, we have 4 different groups. Special interest groups, SIGs, are the primary org unit used by the project. They are the only group that can actually own code within the project. Any repo or code base must be owned by a SIG. They can also sort of further delegate ownership of code to SIG-owned subprojects that will have their own set of owners. But they still sort of go back up to that parent SIG. Working groups are intended to be short-lived projects or short-lived groups. They have a goal and they will dissolve when that goal is achieved. They tend to form together when there is a general need by multiple SIGs or the community to achieve something cool, awesome, we're dissolving. Any code that's developed by a working group must be owned by one or more of the sponsoring SIGs. Next, we have user groups, and this is actually the newest community group. They are there sort of for end users to collaborate and sort of bubble up requests or provide feedback on features in a unified way. They are not allowed to own any code in the project. They're just there to help provide signal to the other SIGs and other community groups. Lastly, we have committees, and committees tend to handle sensitive topics like code of conduct or security or the general governance of the project through the steering committee. They do not actually have open membership and are either elected or appointed. Now, our groups can actually be broadly categorized into several different areas. We have project-wide groups. This is sort of the meta groups that are more around the management of the project. So things like contributor experience or release, testing, these touch every area of the project. Next, we sort of have horizontal or cross-cutting groups that touch multiple areas of the code base. So things like auth, CLI, instrumentation, so things like metrics. Every little point, like every little part is going to sort of emit those things or deal with those things. Lastly, we have vertical, and they tend to be very focused areas. So think like scheduling, storage, or networking. And just from their names, you can sort of get an idea of what these are about just from their name. But if you really want to learn more about them, the best place to go is the K community repo. The Kubernetes community repo is sort of the center where we manage all the sort of meta information about the project. Each community group actually has their own directory and a minimum set of items that they contain in there, namely a charter which outlines the goals and responsibility of that group, and then a README, which is actually a partially auto-generated document that contains all the current information about the group, things like the current chairs and tech leads, which sub-projects they own, when their meetings are, etc. Now, exploring these directories is the best way to sort of get a key glimpse into the different community groups and where you might, where you might find a place to really dive into and grow more as a contributor. All these files and things like that are actually controlled through a single source of truth and yet another YAML file, sigs.yaml in the root of the K community repo. So you hear me mention like the READMEs are auto-generated. So when we go to like update SIG chairs or meeting times, we do it all in this one document, and then we actually have a Golang template that renders out everything else. So we have a nice consistent like pattern between all the different like SIG READMEs. We also have a sort of TLDR version called siglist.md in the root of the community repo that just has like the chairs and the different meeting times. Okay, you start to look at the SIGs, you start to look at the working groups, you found something that appeals to you. You might have joined the mailing list, you might have jumped into the channel in Slack. Sort of the next thing for you to get involved with is actually to join in one of the meetings. So every SIG working group and user group has a regular scheduled meeting. All these meetings are actually recorded and uploaded to YouTube. We can also get a little like slap happy with them sometimes. So in this particular instant here, I don't know if you can tell the hats with kind of the blurry picture, but this is our APAC meeting. So it's like midnight or 1 a.m. for Jeff and I forget, I think it was Noah in the upper right-hand corner just randomly grabbed a hat, and then we all grabbed random ones, and the meeting just sort of devolved from there. But we have fun with it. And in any case, these meetings will give you more insight to what the SIG is working on at that point in time, and a lot of the sub-projects themselves have different ones. And if you can't make it to a meeting, all of them are recorded and uploaded to YouTube. We've actually been using a third-party service called Splain to sort of automate that process. Last time it was hit or miss on whether they would get uploaded or at least in a timely fashion. Now this just sort of takes care of it for us. and we have a sort of set of YouTube admins, so a group of, I forget how many of us we have now, 6? I think it's actually 10. But we'll go through and like quickly edit the videos and make sure they're posted online and categorized right.
Can I add one thing? There's one thing that I definitely want to add and make sure is very clear. You do not need to be part of a SIG or a working group to join these meetings. And in fact, in every meeting that I can think of on Zoom, we can we've had people that are brand new that just show up, and then at the beginning of the meeting, do we have anyone new here? Does anyone want to introduce themselves? And you can either say yes or no. So again, we are trying to be incredibly inclusive and incredibly welcoming. No pressure. Like, you can just lurk on the Zoom call so long as you're not trolling on it.
Okay. So with that, like, you've joined a group, you've contributed a few PRs, maybe you've helped with the management of one of the Kubernetes properties, like join the YouTube admin team. Now it's actually time to talk about the contributor ladder. So this credit for this actually goes to Guinevere Sanger, one of our contributors that helps with a lot of different areas in the project. But we refer to this sort of diagram as the ladder. So you go from being a non-org member to start to contribute a little bit. You then become a member, and over time you may become like more familiar with the different areas of the code base. So you start reviewing more PRs, and eventually you get like PR'd into the owner's file as a reviewer. And then after a bit longer, you've reviewed quite a few PRs, you've contributed a good amount of the code base, you become an approver. And like going beyond that, you start being an approver in multiple areas. You learn more about even other areas of the project. You could then become a sub-project owner, owning an entire section of the code base. And when you're at that level, you might sort of help set goals and outline the milestones for that sub-project. But for everyone, the first big hurdle is making the jump from non-member to member. And that's about building trust. So org members don't actually need to have like OK to test. They can LGTM PRs. There is, again, a certain level of trust. And with 42,000 plus contributors, there's only about 1,200 are org members, which is 3% of the contributor base. Now, I know that sounds like an awfully small amount, but it's actually pretty easy to become an org member as long as you're fairly active within the project. So active usually is related to opening PRs, doing reviews, but we also have folk who are helping like various non-code ways. So they help administer some of our communication properties. They help with issue triage. They help wrangling the Kubernetes release. We've actually we've had huge success with onboarding new contributors through the release team, where we have this sort of set milestone of every quarter, people will jump in and just help facilitate a Kubernetes release. And the big hurdle usually when it comes to applying for org membership is actually finding two sponsors. The two sponsors need to be an approver or reviewer from an owner's file, and they have to be from two separate organizations. So, let's say you're active, you found your sponsors, now you just sort of actually fill out a GitHub issue template that we have in a special repo called Kubernetes/org. And after that, it's actually handed off to the membership coordinators and GitHub admin team to sort of actually process the membership request. And this is actually done with a tool we wrote called Peribolos. So, like many things we do, it's built as a plugin for our CI system, and it uses YAML. It's sort of GitOps for GitHub management, where we can define information about the orgs, the members, and the teams, and things like that. And the membership coordinators will update the member list by essentially PRing in and actually just adding that GitHub handle into the list for that org. And when it's all said and done, when it's merged by Peribolos, it syncs and sends out an invite to that org member. Peribolos also lets us do something else, and where we can actually delegate GitHub team management. So similar to the whole owners file thing, we can break apart the configs and delegate the team membership. This is sort of works with the owners file in there. So with everyone, like the subprojects having different areas of the code base, different GitHub teams, different repos, those can be delegated to the actual SIG leads, and they don't have to involve the GitHub admin team or membership coordinator teams to handle that. We don't want to get control of those groups. We trust the SIGs, we trust the groups to be able to lead and manage it themselves. Okay, so you know, a little about Peribolos. When you submit your issue and the GitHub admin team or membership coordinator cuts the PR for it, they will actually respond back into the issue, just letting them know that, you know, once the PR is merged, they will get an invite. They also might add some random we have other proud plugins like /meow, /woof, /honk, and /pony, because you do. Now, once that PR is merged and an invite is sent as soon as the Peribolos job is complete, this is also significantly easier than the old method where you would have to send like an email to a list, then have the sponsors respond to the email on the list, and then it'd be up to the GitHub admin team to manually go in and add you to the GitHub org and any of the sub-teams and things like that. Now, everything is clearly spelled out and defined in YAML.
Let's say YAML one more time. Don't worry, we're not done. So once you become an org member, you might be curious about how you can kind of grow your role within Kubernetes. And I just wanted to give a couple quick instances of ways you can do that. As we've said, we have moderators for all of our different communication platforms. Maybe you're always on Slack and you've been interacting with other Slack admins, and again, it's about growing trust. You've gained some trust with them. You can apply to become a Slack admin. You do that through a GitHub issue and then a GitHub pull request. Same with YouTube and Zoom, GitHub pull request and an issue. But the other thing is, if you have a really interesting idea that might be cross-SIG or a user-facing change within Kubernetes, and you want to propose that feature, there is a repo called Kubernetes Enhancements, or K-Enhancements, and you can file an issue and a pull request to create what's called a KEP, or a Kubernetes Enhancement proposal. And that's just a couple quick examples of things that you may be interested in doing the more you get familiar with the project. So I'm sick of talking about GitHub. Let's talk about everyone's favorite thing, which is Slack. As Bob said, we have 92,000 users. That is the largest public Slack possible. It's a tool we all have to use for work. And I want to be very clear, their designs and practices are very anti-open community. Slack is meant to be an internal tool for businesses, not a community management tool. And they have things like, fun undocumented APIs. So what do? Well, first, we create a whole lot of emojis because we need to vent our frustration somehow, and we need to express ourselves, and we do that through emojis. We have to, just get that done. So first, you add a lot of emojis. And then you cry a little bit because there are so many other problems when you're trying to deal with a 92,000 user community on Slack. How do you moderate that? How do you deal with that? Things like code of conduct issues, people that are spamming, it's painful. So you get a Slack admin group. You get a group of dedicated people that are incredibly interested in keeping Slack around as a community tool. For example, right now we have over 20, I think it's 23 or 24 Slack admins that we also have geo-distributed across the world, because if Bob and I are the only two Slack admins, that's going to cover the Eastern time zone, and that's it. So what happens if something happens in APAC? So we strived to make sure we are a geo-distributed team. And then one of our lovely Slack admins, I'm like directly going to shout out Catherine Berry for doing this, decided that they were sick of everything that was wrong with Slack, and they were going to just do everything they could to make sure Slack is usable for us. So a Herculean effort that was almost entirely done by Catherine was writing what we have, what we call our Slack Infra tools. So we have this welcomer. If you join the Kubernetes Slack and you are not part of the Kubernetes Slack right now, you would get a nice, happy welcome message that goes, hey, welcome to the Kubernetes Slack. Happy for you to be here. By the way, we follow the CNCF TOC. Please follow that. Click here. COC, sorry. That's the welcomer portion of Slack Infra. We have an event logger that will track such things as channel actions like creation or deletion. Also, the Slack admins get a lovely feed of every new emoji that is created, just to make sure that nothing sketchy is happening. And then there is also what we call the Slack reporter and the Slack moderator. The Slack reporter, if you hover over a Slack message in the Kubernetes Slack, you'll get the little triple dot menu. You can actually see report message. And through that, you can actually report something if you feel like it's spam or you feel like it might violate a code of conduct, things like that. And that will actually send a message to the Slack admins, and we will do something about it. We will act on it. That is our job. Unfortunately, you do have some people that decide to troll or abuse the Slack reporter tool, but it's still meeting a need that we have, and that's something that we can just deal with. What are you going to do? So, like with Kubernetes and everything else that we've talked about, everything happens to be declared in YAML. So now let's go back to YAML. We actually manage our entire Slack, all of the channels, all of our user groups, everything in Slack through YAML. And that's through another tool that Catherine wrote called Tempelis. It's Greek for lazy or slacking off. Yeah, all right. So Tempelis updates the state of Slack to match the provided YAML config files in a repo. So combined with our CI system and this YAML, it literally becomes GitOps for Slack. Yes, we did that. We can also do something cool like start delegating channels and channel responsibilities to people like SIG owners. Sig Docs is a great example of that. So Sig Docs has a lot of different translators because we try to translate docs in as many countries and languages as possible. So they're going to need their own Slack channels for those individual languages. Otherwise, it's going to be really painful. We don't want to get notified every time Sig Docs wants to create a new channel for a new language, so we created this method for them to be owners of their own Slack channels. It's almost like owners files for the Slack channels and for the SIGs.
You'll start to see a pattern here.
Yep, you will start to see a pattern. Likewise, there's this concept of user groups. So if you have used Slack in some business fashion, you might have a user group. It might only have a single user if you're doing something like, Slack on call. We can do that as well. And we do that for things like Prow on call, for things like the release team managers, and that's all managed as well through Tempelis and through our Slack config in Slack Infra. Just another example of how we're doing that and how it relates to everything in GitHub. So other things, part of our infrastructure and part of our community, we own kates.io/groups. All of our groups are managed within Slack as well. Yeah, I know. I was getting there. It is literally GitOps for G Suite. So if you want to create a new email account or, again, other G Suite objects, we also do that through YAML and Git. I hope you are getting the pattern here. But the really good thing is it also helps save a lot of monthly costs on our G Suite accounts. We use Gitcrypt uses GPG, and it safely stores and encrypts files within a Git repo, and that's how that is all managed. We also have our own domain name, and we have a lot of subdomains that we manage. This is all managed through kates.io/DNS. That goes to github.com/kubernetes/kates.io. But we manage our own DNS because we have crazy sub-projects that are like SIG-oriented, or we have our own services because GitHub search can be kind of painful. cs.kates.io search, so you can search the whole code base. But our entire infrastructure is defined within this repo, and changes to that repo automatically update things. So,
some are still powered by Falcon.
Some are still powered by Falcon, praise be. Something that is not actually powered by GitHub and YAML is our in-person events. These summits are contributor-focused content. We have new contributor workshops at them, and then we have a current contributor track. The whole point is we're trying to bring more people into the community because we need more people in the community. We have had sessions here talking about improving our process and automation. We've even had sessions that do things like, there is a flaky test, let's just debug this live. And those are usually the really fun ones. We've had 8 events. We usually, at this point, our cadence is 3 a year. This year is a little weird. I don't know what it's going to look like. I know there's going to eventually be one in Amsterdam whenever that's announced, and the Boston one is going to be in November. And Shanghai, I believe, is completely canceled, unfortunately.
They're going virtual.
Yeah, the whole thing is we're going to be doing a virtual event. Sorry, we're going off script again. We're doing a virtual event this year. It's kind of for Shanghai, and also because Amsterdam was planned and we had all that time blocked off. But there will be an Amsterdam Contributor Summit, and there will be one in Boston in November.
Okay. So you've now been in the project for, let's say, a year. You've been to a summit. You've possibly gotten into our review our approvers, and it's that time again. Each year we have steering elections, and the steering committee sort of oversees project governance and defines the overall project values and structure that I sort of hinted at and talked about earlier. They help ensure that all the community groups comply with the general governance requirements that we outline. And in general, they work for better transparency within the project. Now, each year, the steering committee dictates the sort of voting requirements for the next election, but in the past, it's actually been you haven't needed to be an org member to vote. You just must be active within the community and maintain sort of a minimum threshold of activity. And to sort of gauge this, we use a tool called DevStats that was developed by the CNCF to give us those metrics. Now, DevStats uses the GitHub archive project and actually crunches a bunch of data regarding GitHub events. And so in the past, our voting threshold has actually been 50. And when you think about it, 50 GitHub events in a year in any one of the Kubernetes repositories isn't actually a whole lot. And we do actually even have like exception forms for those that do things that aren't recorded in DevStats. So things like, being a part of the YouTube admin team or a Slack admin, or, possibly one of our Discuss mods. DevStats itself provides quite a bit more. If you're a data nerd, this can be a huge fun thing to dive into because you can like export any of the stuff and really have fun going into it. But now with sort of the steering election, you get to decide, who drives the governance for the project, the things that impact the community. And as we've sort of talked about, the people are the center of Kubernetes with all this. We want to make contributing to Kubernetes easier. And it's a surprisingly difficult task, but we try. We build and automate what we can. We try and remove toil and improve the processes to help the community and to help future contributors like you in the audience, hopefully. With that, we'll just sort of bring this to an end and I guess move to questions.
Yeah. If you have questions, ask them. We got 15 minutes, and we like actually asking questions more, or answering questions than we do talking. So if you have any questions, please. Taylor, ask us a question.
What is the favorite problem that you have to solve in getting all of this stuff set up? Has it been something like, what's your personal story on that?
My personal story is Tempelis because it is literally taking a third-party product that we are reliant on in a community and turning it into like a GitOpsy model. Like, that to me is insane, and it's also, like, it hasn't broken in over a year. And I mean, come on, when you get to say Slack GitOps, it's kind of interesting and people look at you funny. It's maybe not the most technically challenging problem, but I think it is like the most interesting and also, though you might not see it, the most widely used. Do we have any other questions? Josh?
So Proud is its own independent, quasi-independent project. They talk about doing the same with
So the question is, are you good? So the question is, Prow is its own semi-large project on its own. Has there been any talk to doing that with Tempelos as well? Yes, but unfortunately we are gated by time and effort. I was not joking, Catherine is the sole contributor to Tempelos, aside from like Ben the Elder, myself, and Bob have like done some reviews and like doc specking, but she has done almost everything. And that is not her day job.
Diving into undocumented Slack APIs, like, could definitely use some help.
So currently, Slack Infra resides under Contribex in the community repo, but I don't think there is any talk about spinning it out to be something separate. We have had 3 or 4 different people reach out to ask if they can run it themselves, and we've helped them along. But it becoming its own like Prow type project, I don't think that's going to happen until there's more bandwidth. Shoot. Yeah, so the question is, do we know how many people contribute to Kubernetes as part of their day job versus just independent? Yeah. I don't actually think that's I don't think that's easy. Josh? So I mean, we could data crunch and try and figure it out if we like figure out. Yeah, we do ask in the surveys if like how much. I would say if you look at DevStats, we actually break out employer, so you can actually see, you know, like Red Hat, Google, independent, things like that. But that just says your employer and who had to like clear CLA.
So where things get complicated is, like, I know for me, like, technically I'm not supposed to work on this stuff during my day job, but I have an it's complicated relationship with work, where I can work on during my...
This is recorded.
That's fine. It's out there. I'm allowed to work on it during the daytime hours as long as I still meet my deliverables. So I will usually wind up, you know, attending meetings and knocking out stuff during the daytime, and then doing my work in the evenings. Yeah.
And then, like, to compare and contrast, I used to be his coworker, but I moved to Red Hat, and Red Hat embraces open source. So I can work on things during my day job as long as I'm, you know, meeting the typical goals that I'm trying to meet. So things like the Amsterdam Contributor Summit, I am perfectly fine to do during my day job as well. We also recognize that people may have that relationship with their job and then essentially work 2 completely separate jobs, or not have freedom with their job and work 2 completely separate jobs. So another reason why we continue to try and get new contributors in is because there are shining stars in the Kubernetes community, and they will blink out because they burn out really fast by doing this. Question? I can hear. So make sure I got this right. Have we thought about contacting college communities and potentially holding competitions to try and foster college students and getting into the community? Good. We often engage in GSOC, Google Summer of Code, and we get a lot of college students that way. Outreachy is another internship that we frequently engage with to try and get some people.
Okay, so...
Just feeding me the end.
Yeah. So beyond GSOC, we also work with Outreachy, and the other one, which is a newer one, is Community Bridge, which is an effort from the CNCF. Actually, I think it's LF in general, the Linux, but okay, it's the Linux Foundation in general. But we definitely, you know, when we see students or anything like that joining in, we will do our best to try and help them. Like, you know, I work for a university. He used to work for a university background, so like academic outreach is very, you know, important to us, as well as the general spirit of mentorship that sort of comes from the academic background. And
in 1 second, and just another thing about that, when I was in the expo hall doing booth duty, it was phenomenal seeing such an age range and like kids coming up and actually asking about Kubernetes, and like the fact that apparently a high school has a cloud computing course. I lost my mind. I was like, please tell me who your teacher is. Like, I want to help out. So that has already, yep, yep. Thank you. Oh yeah, Fippy. So if you don't know, there happens to be a children's storybook that the CNCF publishes that it explains Kubernetes fundamentals to children in a cute little book. It's nice. I like it. Josh, you had your hand up?
Yeah. So I'm going to do numbers the next year.
Numbers time.
Yes. Okay. So according to our last contributor survey, 55% of contributors contribute on work time. 27% contribute on their own time, and the remainder said it's complicated.
So there you go.
So every year we send out a survey to the Kubernetes community to try and engage a lot of these things and sort of see where we should focus our efforts as part of contributor experience. And that was from the 2019 survey results. What was the?
So the question is, obviously, this infrastructure didn't happen overnight, nor the like community structure. Could we kind of discuss how it started in like when Kubernetes came out of Google, and then like the progression to now? I honestly don't think we have enough time for that.
The big okay. It's not done yet. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, we're still running on some of Google's infrastructure. We actually have a working group called WGK's Infra with the effort of getting our dependence off Google completely and spinning it up in a technically like a CNCF-owned, essentially Google account, GCP account.
When it comes to governance, the steering committee was something that a bunch of the main contributors got together, and then, like, from its core, what was that, 2 years ago? 2017, so almost 3 years ago, the plan was they were going to bootstrap their own steering committee, but then make it an entirely open election after that. So, like, from 3 years ago, they were already thinking about the long-term plans for the community and governance. Yeah. SIGs, I don't know when the first SIG even like came up. Do you know, Josh? The first SIG? Yeah, the first SIG. Yeah, like.
There was only two of them, but it was part of something part of the idea, and so as a result, they were in the SIG thing from the beginning. I don't remember who it was.
All right. I thought SIGs didn't yeah. I at least thought that SIGs didn't quite exist yet, like in the original 2014, like they firmed up in the 2015, because like when we, like, remember when we joined IRC and everything, it was kind of, yeah. But I don't know. Have to dive into the archives and dig that info out.
We got 5 more minutes if you have other questions.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming.
Yep. Thank you.